This is Invisible Inc., the podcast for under-resourced women entrepreneurs. And I'm your host, Shubha Chakravarti, founder of Achieve. In this podcast, I talk to women entrepreneurs at every stage of their journey about the challenges, the highs, the lows, and what they've learned along the way. We'll also hear from experts who share valuable tips on how to succeed the smart way. Let's jump in. Imagine you're now in a high-stakes situation in your business. It's that moment when you know you need more than just your hard work and expertise to tackle. Can you rise to the occasion? Can you build your risk-taking muscle so you prevail? How do you overcome fear, emotion, and that inner voice that's harshly negative so you make the right move and not the easy move more often? In this episode, pro poker player Melanie Weisner shares the secrets only the pros know on what it takes to harness luck, how to master emotion, and how to take smart risks to achieve the success that's only accessible to the disciplined few. Today, Melanie shows you how you can too. Hello, Melanie. Thank you for coming on our show today. We're very excited to have you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
So, you're one of the few female professional poker players in the world. How did that happen? Tell us a little bit more about your background and your journey to becoming a pro player.
So my story is kind of interesting, and I feel like a lot of women with siblings might have this resonate with them. When I was in high school, my younger brother was playing poker online, and he won $50,000. And I thought to myself, well, if he can do it, I can do it. I started playing poker pretty soon after that in college. I was not good. And I was very stubborn. I did all sorts of things that weren't like necessarily the best decisions. You know, my mom would give me $50 or $100 for books and food, and I would just put it onto the poker site and play. My computer also was a Macintosh computer, so I wasn't able to run the poker sites. I would play on my roommate's computer while she was out, and she had expressly prohibited me from doing that. I ran a game in my dorm. In college, we played like 10 cent, 25 cent poker. One night I won $300 and I bought the Motorola Razr phone, and I thought, this is amazing and I want to keep playing poker. So after college, I was able to do this and become very good online. I was able to put myself through school, which was NYU, and not have a job. It was my job, but I didn't have to wait tables or do anything like that to pay for my school, which was great. And then after I graduated, I went to my first live tournament in Atlantic City. And so I learned from there, I learned about like the live tour and traveling around and the potential for sponsorship doing that. And I thought, like, what a cool thing to be able to travel around the world and play a card game. So I decided to go to the places in Europe and Australia and South Africa and all these places that interested me the most, and play poker while I was doing it. And that was kind of how I got started. And then towards the end of that, so I'm 35 now, and I turned pro when I was 20 and started traveling around when I was 21. So towards the last few years of that, I started traveling a little bit less because the wear and tear on the body and such. But then I started becoming more interested in the ways poker has shaped my life outside of the game, and focused more on consulting and building resources for people to learn the game for those reasons and those benefits.
I think many of us have this conception that poker is just glorified gambling. What's the dummies version of poker for those of us who don't know it?
So it is a version of gambling because there's an element of chance. But it's the same kind of way if you play like a board game with your friend. You're also technically gambling a little bit because you're allowing chance to play an influential role in that world. But you can't just only look at the gambling element. It's very much like real life. You're interacting with an environment where there's lots of chance that's going to happen to you. You don't know who you're going to meet. You don't know what opportunities you're going to have. And you want to play those situations as well as you possibly can. And the same is very much true of poker. You have a lot of decisions and ways to maneuver that are all your choice. So you can develop a skill within these parameters that do happen to include luck. There is still quite a lot of skill. And the players that are the best at poker will show that they keep winning over and over and over. They will make it to the final tables over and over. And that is because they're making better decisions than their opponents. If they weren't making better decisions than their opponents, then money would just get traded around the table and it would just be bingo. But poker is very much a skill game through which there are elements of luck. I'm trying to figure out what you have, which cards you're holding. And I'm trying to see, what does that mean I want to do with my hand? If I have what I think is the best hand, then it means I want you to put more money in the pot. And if I think you have a hand that's beating me, then I want to see if I can try to get you to fold, to bluff and take it from you. And that's where all the skill comes in.
So you mentioned that for the last few years, you've started to see how it translates to real life. Can you speak about some examples that resonate with us?
So I actually have seen that through my whole career, how it translates towards life. It helps me optimize my decision making. When it comes to how I want to handle the tone of an email or exactly what time I want to leave when I'm going somewhere or how I want to process an emotion or anything like that, I think in terms of probabilities, most likely scenario. I think in poker, you think steps ahead and you envision a variety of outcomes and choose which one you think is the best. So it allows me to take a step back, especially in emotional moments, and see what are these outcomes going to be like if I say this or this or this or this. And instead of just going with what I feel, I can see several steps ahead in my daily interactions, and that helps me make better choices within those interactions.
Are there examples from your experience where in a business situation, let's say when you're negotiating some pay or money, any examples from those where you can really see that skill came into play?
There have been many times where I have needed to negotiate salary. My instinct is don't do this. Don't make things tough for yourself. Just accept what it is. It's going to be an awkward confrontation. So I have to fight through that. And I don't know if people in the audience will identify that, but that's my instinct. And then I have to tell myself, let's set that discomfort aside and think what's really going to happen here if you go ahead and ask. The worst they can say is no. They're going to be pleased that you realized you had value and wanted to be compensated for that, rather than being like, oh, she's so disagreeable or whatever, like the typical female fear is. And so I just like play it out in my mind and I try to use logic, the more rational part of my brain, the more probabilistic part of my brain, like, oh, well, if you ask, like you probably have a 50% chance of getting what you want. Why not? There's no downside, et cetera. So I try to use that kind of logic and probabilistic thinking to combat the more scared kind of animal brain that's like, avoid confrontation. And that has really helped me, especially to even see it as just kind of like an exciting thing. Like, let's see where we can go here. Like my boyfriend likes to say, make them an offer you can't refuse. So I just like to see like, where can we go from here? And what can I even learn maybe from this negotiation that will help me in the future? So it's been very helpful. Even there have been many times when I haven't gotten the price that I asked for or, a raise that I wanted. I found that it still had a positive effect on a working relationship because they understood that I was going to ask for what I believed was my value. And I would respect somebody who did that as well. So it's this very animalistic kind of fear that you have to overcome. And poker has given me a lot of proof in that way that if I can do this at the poker table, then I can do this somewhere else.
Great segue. What does it take to be a good poker player?
There's a lot of things that it takes to be a good poker player. You can come at it from a few different angles. So you can come at it from logic. You can come at it from math. You can come at it from psychology. There's lots and lots of ways that you can win. There's elements of how likely am I to make my hand? If I have 2 cards and 2 more on the board and I need 1 more to complete my hand, what's the probability that I'm going to do that? So that's the math element. What's my estimate of the chance that I think I can get you to fold if I make this bet? A lot of mathematical thinking like that. And there's a logic, which is what story is my opponent telling me and what makes sense here? Would they really do this if they had what they're saying they have? And then there's the psychology. How is my opponent behaving? Are they comfortable? What are they giving me in the psychological arena? So you can use pieces of all that. You can dominate in one and be a little weaker in the other. But the number one thing you have to do is be willing to update your thoughts, willing to adjust. You can't think one thing and then have evidence presented to you that it's not the case and continue doing what you're doing. If you do that, you will lose. So an example would be, let's say you sit down at the table with me and I think this lady is loose, aggressive. She's going to bluff me no matter, like, I just get this sense that you're going to try to run me over. That's my psychological, just right off the bat read of you. But then I start being shown evidence that you don't play that way. You're very conservative and you're only betting when you have a strong hand, and I keep paying you off because it's not aligning with my interpretation of you. If I don't update immediately as I get this new information and change my game plan, then I'm going to lose a ton of money to you. And most people won't update. They're very stubborn. They think they're just getting unlucky. They don't look inward and say, well, maybe I'm doing something wrong here. Can I change it? So the best players in the world are able to adapt to changing circumstances and behavior and gameplay around them incredibly quickly, which is also very useful in the real world. In case like a situation takes a turn you don't expect it to, you can adapt and react. And especially in business or socially, that kind of skill is incredibly important, I found.
You made a great point, which is you have to get over almost your very basic human instinct to go with your gut. When
Absolutely.
you see this, which means that you have to admit to yourself that you're wrong or could be wrong, which is a very hard thing to do, especially maybe in something like entrepreneurship, where it's your passion. What are some tricks you have used to help you bring that logical part of your head when your emotions are screaming something different?
What I like to do, and what I like to tell my students as well who struggle with this, denying the fact that you're an emotional being, you're an emotional creature, you're going to be susceptible to this stuff is really not the way. If you do that, you will end up not realizing how you feel, how you need to maneuver, all this stuff. It will be all for naught. What you want to do is understand where that emotion is coming from. So I like to ask myself, here's an example. Let's say I'm playing a poker hand and I start to become fearful. I start to not do what I think I should do because I'm worried about losing, or I'm worried about looking stupid, or any of those things. And that starts to hijack the part of my mind that is responsible for good decisions. So what I like to do is, instead of trying to ignore that and fight through it, I like to say, okay, what's going on here? You're afraid because you think that if you call here and you try to call this guy's bluff and he's not bluffing, that you're going to feel bad about yourself and you're going to look stupid in front of other people. But there's a reason you want to call in the first place. You think this guy is bluffing. There's a reason you want to make this play. Do we actually think that's the correct thing to do? And if so, then what we need to do is we need to make peace with this fearful, kind of scared part of our mind that's like warning us of all these things, and not let it overtake our decisions. What I mean by that is when people like have this kind of looming idea that something terrible is going to happen, they always feel like it's going to be so much worse than it actually is. So if I break it down in the moment, I say, okay, so what's going to happen here? This guy has made this bet and I'm deciding if I want to try to call this bluff. He's looking at me and I'm trying to make my decision. And I think, okay, well, what's going to happen? Let's say I am wrong. What's going to really happen here? Let's play it out if I do that. And I say, okay, well, I'm going to call and he's going to show me the winning hand and I'm going to have to push my cards in the middle and he's going to win the pot and I'm not going to win. And I'm going to feel bad for a few minutes. And that's what it's going to be. And then once I've made peace with that worst case scenario, I'm like, okay, well, you're going to live. You can handle that. It's not as scary as when you bring it into the immediate. That's what I've found. So once I've made peace with that and not let it hijack my thought process, this is an outcome. I accept this is an outcome. I'm playing a game where I know sometimes that's going to happen. I accept that. Then I can set it aside and I can say, well, what's really the right decision here now that I'm not being taken over by that fear? And maybe the right decision is to fold. Maybe it's not to make the call. But you can't possibly think through it properly if you don't separate what's rational and what's emotional in your mind.
So it sounds like a lot of mindfulness at play, being aware of the frightened emotional side and then still learning to live with it and then coming back to the rational self. A random question. Have you ever practiced meditation and is that ever an influence?
I have, and most good poker players are also pretty well practiced in meditation. I like to think about why I want to make the choices I make, why I'm thinking the things I do, if they're rational, if they're not, what's behind them. I like to know my own mind. And meditation allows you to sit with your own mind. There's different styles of it, obviously. I find that a huge benefit of meditation is to sit with the uncomfortable, to practice being uncomfortable, to practice not necessarily always having a distraction, to just be with your own thoughts. You learn a little bit about who you are like that. I like to say that you learn about who you are when you're playing poker as well. You learn kind of what person you are and what ticks you off and what like excites you and stuff like that. But it's also incredibly true for meditation. If you sit with your own thoughts, you start to learn, well, why am I thinking this? Why is this coming into my mind right now? And why am I getting distracted by this? You start to become comfortable with this kind of inner monologue that we all have. And I think navigate it a little better when we need to.
So it sounds like poker is a masterclass in mindfulness almost.
It is, because you're constantly having to separate what you want to do and all the information that you're processing from what the emotional, reactive, competitive part of you wants to do. Not only are you trying to do that for yourself, but you're also trying to interpret how your opponents are feeling and what road they might be going down and how you can maneuver versus that. It's this combination of hyper self-awareness, which I think meditation teaches very well, and being incredibly empathetic and attentive to how others are feeling.
You talked earlier about luck and how luck does play a role, and it does in life too, right? How do you work with luck? Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. So how do you work with luck to maximize your own outcomes?
I am sensitive to luck, I think, more so than others. I just have to be aware of that when I play. Like, I'm incredibly hyper competitive. So when I play like a board game with a group of friends, my boyfriend and my friends are usually there to have a good time and be with people, and I'm there to destroy you. That's how I feel about it. Because I'm passionate about the competition, sometimes the results, especially when it's luck, you feel so bad because there's just nothing you could have done. And it's like, I played so well and like, I still nothing, So I try to sort of embrace that as part of the reason that the game exists. So if it was 100% skill, if the better player won every time, it wouldn't be interesting. And worse players wouldn't play. And there wouldn't be this like heightened element to it. I would just have the best hand and you would have the worst hand, and it would be no drama whatsoever and you wouldn't play again. So I try to embrace it as part of, the cost of doing business, essentially, in poker. And I also try really hard to remember when luck is on my side, because the human mind actually processes negative events with more power than it does positive events, which is why you remember all these negative things that happen to you. You don't always remember the positive things. So I try to be aware of that. And I try to pay attention to when I'm ignoring the good, essentially, and try to have that balance out. So if I am eliminated from a tournament on what's called a bad beat, is where you get unlucky, you had the best of it, but then the cards just didn't fall your way. I try to remember, well, okay, yesterday you did this to someone else. Just remember that. So I just try to give myself a little bit more perspective that way. And that helps in everyday life too. I think when something unlucky happens, one of these things is going to happen to you this year. It's a certainty. You're just getting it out of the way now, that kind of thing. Just try to have a little bit of perspective on unlucky situations.
Can you talk about what is the role of risk and how does that carry over into real life, especially in business?
In poker, if you sit around and you wait to be dealt the winning hand, you'll just lose because you have to commit chips. It's called blinds. Every round. And if you just always fold, wait for the hand, it's really hard to win like that. You have to be aggressive. You have to take risk when you think you might have the best of it, or when you think you can push someone off their hand, stuff like that. I think that especially as a woman, that's something I've had to fight really hard to overcome, because in a lot of ways that our society is civilized, we've made incredible progress socially, culturally, technologically, and our bodies and our biology and chemistry have not necessarily had time to catch up to where we are as a society. We still have an appendix, for example. And And I think that a lot of women, not all, and I'm probably less risk averse than most women, but I do find myself fearing risk a little bit more than I think the average male counterpart does. So it's something I have to think about. And don't get me wrong, there's an amazing side to embracing risk as well. But when I first started poker, I had to kind of get over this hurdle for risk. And the way I did it was I was always too conservative and always like playing too tight. And I just had to see how it was done and know that it would work. There was a guy who was a friend of mine who was an online poker player, and he posted all of his hands that he had played on this public forum. And he was this maniacal, super aggressive player. Reading this, and I'm like, okay, I get this. I understand. And it just clicked. It took me from this end of the spectrum to the middle where I really needed to be. And I think that when people find that something works, like a bluff is really scary. You don't have anything. What if they call you? You're going to lose all this money. But if it works, if you make the move and you see that it works, now you have the confidence to do it next time. I think the same carries over to the real world. Taking the first step is always the hardest. Not that you're necessarily going to be bluffing in business, but there are plenty of arenas of risk, and risk tolerance predicts success in business. Like people, if you do these little casino games with people, and you give them $20 and you give them a chance to win $2,000, and you give them the odds of 1 in 80 or something, which would be a very profitable thing to take, but you're going to lose it 79 out of 80 times, they will never take it, because they fear the loss more than they welcome the profitable opportunity. And I think things like long shot investments and decisions in business that are going to be risky, people fear the failure of them, but they don't think about it in terms of trials. Well, if I were to do this situation a million times in like a million different multiverses, my overall expectation would be incredibly profitable. If you've determined that that's the case, and you just have to quiet that voice inside your head that's like, I don't want to lose, I'm afraid. And that's like part of the playing to win rather than playing not to lose. You end up losing when you play not to lose. That's a helpful first step. You have an experience, you take a risk, and you get to see that it worked. So a little success early on is actually really helpful in the risk arena. But I think that just forcing yourself to take a risk that you've determined is profitable, even when you don't want to, is very helpful in building up that skill and building up that tolerance. And it's not easy. It's really not easy at all. If there's a person in your life, I would say, who's really good at that kind of thing, I would try to learn from them. Like, how do you feel about these situations? What would you do in my situation? That kind of thing. Finding people that have skill sets that are, complementary to yours, I think can be really helpful in that way. So like my poker friends all had the skills that I didn't. I was great at reading people and setting traps, and they were great at bluffing their opponents and muscling them out of the hands. And so like they were great counterparts for me to learn from.
You talked about early success being important. What if you took a risk and it backfired? How do you get over that? I should have never done this. I'm an idiot. The voice in your head that's criticizing you.
So that's a really important thing to ask. And one of the professors at Northwestern in this program that partners with Poker Power has called it the itty bitty shitty committee in your head.
I love it.
It's just so true, I'm very self-critical, so this is something that I really work on. And I think you really have to be careful to separate the quality of the decision from the result. So for example, if I were to ask you, what's the best decision you ever made? What would you tell me?
I don't know, marrying my husband.
And it had a good outcome, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So it may not actually be the best decision you've ever made. You just view it that way because it's paired with a good outcome. The best decisions, not to say that it's not the best decision, but no one will ever tell you, well, the best decision I ever made was taking this shot and it didn't work out, but for these reasons, it was so good. Because humans have a super hard time separating results from the decision point. And poker is all about making the right decisions irrespective of the outcome. You do that long term, the outcomes will come to you. You don't have to worry about it. So when reviewing something, you have to say, am I upset because I lost here? And am I looking for a reason to be unhappy with myself and criticize myself? Or did I make the right play and it just, didn't work out? Would I make it again, knowing what I've known? And that's where the review of your play comes into play. And sometimes it's the other way around. Sometimes people want to let themselves off the hook I think this is more typical in men, but sometimes people want to let themselves off the hook and they're looking for an excuse of like, it wasn't my fault because this. But if you can become very practiced at separating the decision point from the results, sometimes they need to be connected. Sometimes they're useful. Sometimes you made a bad decision and you got a bad result. That's fair sometimes. But if you're able to really separate the two and trust yourself on the quality of your decision in the moment, then you're going to become a better decision maker overall. That's really hard to do. But if you have like a kind of a methodology, wait, before you start critiquing yourself, hold on. Let's look at the actual decision. Was that bad or was that good? And if it's bad, not beat up myself. I'm so terrible. No one will ever think I'm good or whatever. How could I make sure that I don't make this mistake again? And then you learn from your own mistake and you correct it. And the best players all do that. And I also think the best business people do that. They learn from their own failures.
So it almost sounds like you're recommending having a checklist of what makes a good decision and improving that over time as you make these decisions have an expected outcome and then an actual outcome. It sounds like you should have something going in to say, I expect these 5 things to come out, because you don't have clear odds and rules like you do in a game like poker in business.
Well, if you have that, if you have the framework you're suggesting, then you have the framework for evaluating. How well did I do it at my objectives, right? Otherwise, you're just lost in this emotional mess of like, how do I feel about what happened? Which is just so bad. The human emotions are really good for detecting danger and like perceiving a mate. If you hurt yourself doing something, that was incredibly dangerous. And so you'd have to be like, well, I'm never going on that rock or that mountain again. But the decisions we're making in business and analytically and academically in that style, it's not going to cost us our life to make a mistake. So it's incredibly important. Just learn how to understand that emotion and separate it from the decision-making process.
We were talking about risk and how women feel less able or less willing to take these risks. Are there other tips in terms of how you can get yourself off that perch of, I don't want to take risks? For example, I'll never invest in equities, or I will never stake all this in a business. What are some hacks or tips that have helped you develop a greater
hacks for risk? Honestly, it sounds like a bit sales pitchy, but you can practice it in a game. Play poker. Learn how to do it in a way that is more controlled. It's like a microcosm. Learn how to take a risk with $200 in a game of poker than your life savings in a random stock. Not that that's necessarily what people are doing, but just like any other skill in life, nothing is going to come without practice. It's work and it's practice and it's honing it. Some people have the one-off innate gift, like a singer or whatever, that's just like innate talent. But most of us have to develop these skills. And for me, this came later in life because from my experience, risk is not necessarily as prized as a like feminine trait. As little girls, me and my friends were not being encouraged to go ride a motorcycle, and there was always like this sense of kind of safety, whereas the boys were more risky, adventure-y. That's what just seemed normal. Not that, my mom did anything wrong by not sending me on some kind of risky competitive adventure, but I didn't really practice that early in life. I think that you have to find ways to practice that. And it's just like anything else. You put the time, the work, the effort into it, you practice it, you're going to become good at it because your mind is going to learn. Your mind is going to understand these pathways and become efficient at it. That's what our brains are supposed to do. They're supposed to adapt and learn. So if you can practice it in some other way, and poker is a great way, making decisions, overcoming this risk, you'll find that translates for you outside. You might hear someone speak who has a completely different professional domain than you, but something that they say clicks for you. You had that experience. You can apply what they're saying in a different domain to something in your own life. And the same is true for poker or anything else that could teach you some risk tolerance. And even a fun way to do it would be to ask yourself, what's something you're scared of? Like bungee jumping or whatever it is. Having an experience of doing that after you bungee jump or after you do like skydive or whatever. Have you ever done any of that?
Not skydiving, but I went up in Vegas to that. I'm afraid of heights.
Okay, so it's pretty scary on the way up, right? But how did you feel right after?
Euphoric,
right? And also oh, that wasn't so bad. maybe I could do it again, right? So if you can just you can find a fun way to practice, you can find like a more analytical way to practice like poker, but it's not just going to come to you. The dream job, the dream skills, they're not just going to like land in your lap. You have to find ways to create that for yourself. So I think it's practice like anything else.
Great. So I'm going to hit on one other thing that has to do with women. So in poker, it doesn't help your case if you're transparent. And I think it's easier for women to be transparent, especially when things are not going well, whether it's in business or poker. How do you deal with that, and what are some things women can do?
So, yeah, we're taught that wearing our heart on our sleeve is this really great thing, et cetera, et cetera. There's a time and a place for that kind of emotion and sensitivity and all that stuff. But it's not really what's going to help you in the business arena. And really just life is about making good decisions and making better decisions than people who you're competing against. And even just like in a social situation, if I can make a better decision on how I speak to you, for example, if I can ignore, maybe let's say you said something to me that you just got up on the wrong side of the bed today, you said something that was mean, and I now have the instinct to fight back. But instead, I tell myself, let's remove ourselves from that first instinct. That's not going to get me an optimal result. If I'm thinking in this way, rather than heart on my sleeve, true to my emotion kind of thing, not only am I going to get a better result for myself, but you're going to feel better as well as my friend or my business partner or whoever it is. Even if you did something mean to me, it's not going to escalate. And that's just such an incredibly powerful tool, I think, because people are so reactionary. People are incredibly reactionary. They're incredibly quick to fly off the handle. I think I strayed from your original question.
No, this is good. You were talking about how women can not show their heart on their sleeve. Are there tricks? How did you school yourself to not react when you had a bad hand come up or something really nasty happened and your competitor is sitting right across the table from you?
That's interesting. Part of this is like self-awareness. So I would pay a lot of attention to myself because I was like, okay, I don't want to give anything away. How can I know when I'm giving something away? And so I would have a good hand and I'd be like, okay, what are you doing with your body? What are you doing with your face? How are you behaving? And then I'd be like, okay, whatever you're doing, stop that. Don't do that again. But now that you know what your physical reaction was, look for that in someone else. Is someone else doing that? So I've been able to take the self-awareness and interpret other people's behavior from that. So the best advice I can give on the display of emotion is pay attention to yourself and ask yourself, what are you doing? Then don't do that. Don't give anything away. In poker, you try to just like look and act the same through every hand, but it's kind of tough, especially in super high pressure situations. But by paying attention to myself and not being like, don't think about it, by really paying close attention, I was able to see, okay, here are the behaviors that I'm doing. Here are maybe the tells that I'm giving away. Let's work on overcoming those and let's look for those in others. In terms of the trait being considered a positive one, I just think that there's a time and a place for that. It's not that if you don't wear your heart on your sleeve, you're not authentic. Like you can still be authentic in your interactions without displaying every emotion that you feel all the time. And I think you get better results when you do that. And I really just feel like if they're like, I don't think so, why don't you try it my way and see what happens? Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it won't work for you. But at least then you'll know. People have a tough time straying from the familiar. So if they've always behaved a certain way, it's very tough to get them to try something else. But when you go through that hard process of trying to overcome a habit, often you're very glad that you did. You're glad for the experience. You have nothing to lose by trying. If you feel like, you're not getting where you want to get in some arena, you're not getting the, result from somebody that you want or the business that you want, the worst thing you can probably do is continue doing the same thing that's not working, which actually brings us full circle to the adaptability part of our conversation.
One of the things in that context that I've heard is, when you're really hijacked by emotion, I've gotten some advice that says, go through a routine, a ritual that says, find 5 red things in the room, find 3 circular things in the room so that it grounds you. Has that ever been something you used or heard or?
No, I haven't done that personally, but I really like that. And I like that because I think that you should find something. You should find something that centers you. Everyone is different. When I work with my students, I like to ask them, let's say they make a bad decision or they had a really bad outcome or they got too flustered or whatever. I ask them, well, now that we're removed from the situation, is there anything like I could have told you in the moment or that you could have told yourself that maybe that outcome wouldn't happen? And so if you think about it from that perspective, there's the strong self and there's the weak self, and they are not the same. And the example I like to use is one that's very close to me, which is like, I'm going to be really healthy this month and I'm not going to eat any junk food, but I go to the grocery store and I buy it anyway. And I'm like, I'll just have it. I'm not going to eat it once in a month or whatever, cut to like all the bags of chips. It's because the version of myself who's in the grocery store really believes what she's saying. She's not the weak version that's like at the end of a really long day and just wants some junk food. So they're not the same. But if I understand as the strong version of myself that I have to protect the weak version of myself, and I say, I'm going to do something nice for myself and I'm going to buy some broccoli instead of these potato chips, then when I am the weak version of myself, I have been protected by the strong version of myself. So in poker, I like people to try to hack themselves that way. How do I behave when I'm weak? What do I need when I'm weak? And how can I put a system into place so that when I'm weak, I don't have to create it then, because you're not able to. So let's say I am struggling with losing, with defeat. Let's say I lose a pot and then everything goes off the rails. And I know that, and I'm tilted. I just want to get back at whoever got me. And that's never a good motivation for anything. So what if I have a rule where if I lose a hand of poker of, some significance, I simply take a break for 15 minutes. And that's the rule. I don't have to decide in the moment, should I take a break now? What do I really need? Because I'm not going to want to if I leave that to my choice. And in the moment, I'm not going to want to do it. I'm just like, oh, this is my rule. I know I have to do it. And then when I come back and be like, I'm so glad I did that, I feel so much better. So I like to think about those two selves as different people. And this could be in another situation, right? Like not a poker situation. How do you perform poorly under pressure? Like what's your weakness when in this situation? And how could you design something as the you right now, not under pressure, that's going to help the you then? And usually if people sit down and they give it some thought and they write some things down, they can come up with some pretty creative solutions. But we just assume in the moment we're going to be able to deal with it, and we're often not.
So the psychological equivalent of having a written shopping list?
Kind of a bit, yeah. Anything that you can do when you know yourself, right? You know what you're like. You know the weak part of yourself. And you know like, oh, well, if I give myself any room in this way, I'm just going to like off the rails go. In poker, we call it tilt. And tilt is any deviation from your best play. So it doesn't just mean that you go crazy and you lose all your chips. It could be the other way. Maybe you get scared and you become more conservative. It's anything that changes you from your best self to worse in some way. And so great poker players are always looking for ways to mitigate that, because if you play in that state, you're compromised. It doesn't mean you can't do well. You still could, but you're not going to do your best. You're always looking to analyze, well, what's the way that I tilt? Do I get more aggressive? Do I get more conservative? Do I get more scared? Do I get annoyed by everybody? What is the way? And then once you find the way, you can now figure out what's the best counter to that. If you walk people through logical steps like this, they can easily come up with it. But from the outset, it's just like, it seems like this big problem. Like, what can I do about this? But if you really break it down, you can logic your way into a solution. I feel very strongly about that.
So you talked a lot about your inner self. Through your development as a poker player, have you faced any inner barriers of self-belief, lack of confidence, especially when you're up against all these men who are trying to take every advantage of you psychologically to win?
The answer is absolutely. This is a question that is very dear to me. When I think about my career and what I regret, that's what I regret the most. Self-doubt and not having confidence to do what I know was right. And it's because I was very caught up not wanting to make mistake and not wanting to look stupid in front of other people. And in poker, you kind of have to be willing to look stupid and make a mistake and just take a chance. Like maybe your play doesn't work. Maybe your call doesn't work. So I would find myself in these spots, like it would be on TV or in a high pressure situation. And I knew the play I was supposed to make, But the risk of being caught or looking foolish or whatever just prevented me from taking the aggressive move. And I just folded my hand or took the more conservative route. So I would leave the game thinking like, well, I avoided looking stupid, right? But I didn't really give myself the best shot. And so I would look back on all these moments of my career thinking, what if? People tend to regret inaction more than they regret action. So I would find myself looking back and feeling like if I had just been willing to go for it, at least I could tell myself at the end of the day, you went for the win. You put everything you had on the table and you went for the win rather than playing it safe. So I think if I could tell my old self something, I would tell them exactly what I was saying here about the fear. Make peace with that. Okay, maybe you're going to look dumb and run this bluff here, and people are going to say you're stupid for having made it. Okay, so what? That's not going to kill me, right? I was doing some of this thing that I was saying, playing not to lose rather than playing to win. So the self-doubt was really harmful to me. And I think about a lot like what could have been. It's hard to tell people to like not care and go for it because we are so protective of our images and so curating of them, especially nowadays. But I feel like if you ask yourself before any situation that you encounter, how am I going to feel if I'm at the end of this and I don't go for it? And maybe sit with that scenario and see how that feels versus how am I going to feel if I really go for it and it doesn't work out? Probably much better than the first alternative. If you can make peace with those results, I think that can really help with the doubt. You want to compete and behave in a way that you're proud of. And if you can see that one step ahead, like what can I do here that's going to make me feel like I did my best and I gave myself the best shot, you'll often find it's those more daring, more aggressive, more risk-taking things that if you have the plan going in, this is how I'm going to do it. If I have this fear, I'm going to ignore it, et cetera, et cetera. If you think about it and have that plan going in, then you're going to be more likely to be able to perform than if you just assume you're going to do it in the moment, because it's very scary in the moment.
So there's this question of bias, and I would imagine that poker is probably one of the most male-dominated, biased professions there is.
Absolutely.
Talk to us about how that feels, the impact it has had on you, and how you hack that bias and still perform at your best.
So there's a few sides to it. I'm usually the only woman at the table that I'm sitting at. Sometimes there's another one, but it's a male-dominated arena. And there's a part of that that is intimidating, which is they feel like I'm an outsider. They don't really, like everybody in my era is not this thing that you see on TV of the underground rooms and the cigars. They're all just nerdy college kids who like found online poker, and they're very welcoming to girls, if not terrified of them. So I was lucky that I had a mostly welcoming situation, a lot of great friends on the tour. But I've been in plenty of situations where I've been at the poker table and been objectified or talked down to or whatever. So firstly, I did develop a thick skin, which I don't think women should have to do, but I do think it served me in a lot of ways. What people say just affects me less, and I think that's a powerful trait to be able to have. I like to be in control of how I respond to things, not the other way around. So for the most part, it's been an okay situation in that regard. But there are definitely ways that I've had to prepare myself. Like, what am I going to do if somebody says this to me? Or how should I react in this situation? Or like, am I going to just let somebody run me over? Like, there's all that stuff. But there's also, I think, a pretty exciting part of it, which is like beating the guys at their own game. That's really, and that was always really fun for me, to take somebody else's underestimation of me and use it against them. I always thought that was really cool. For example, so in poker, if I know that you are underestimating me and you think that I'm a very stereotypical woman player, I'm very conservative, I'm scared, I don't want to take risks, I'm never going to bluff. If I know that you think that about me, then I'm going to bluff you every hand, you know? And if it's the other way, if I think you're underestimating me the other way, like, oh, she's some hot shot who thinks she can run over everyone, then I'm going to play conservatively against you and you're just going to be shipping me the pot every time and you're not going to know what happened to you. So I like to figure out the way in which someone is underestimating me and use it against them to beat them. Because my goal is not to necessarily change someone's mind about their bad attitude. My goal is to win. So if you're going to give me a tool that I can use against you, I'm going to take it. Rather than feeling like he shouldn't be underestimating me, you do what you want and I'm going to use it to my advantage. And I think that's a really great attitude for like a lot of situations that you find yourself in and shitty people that you find yourself up against in life. So that has been the way I've proceeded in the world. But it does create a super interesting dynamic because there's always these things, these hands or situations where I'll tell my friend about and they'll be like, that would never happen to me. That only happens because you're a girl at the table, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm aware of the unique dynamic. Like it opens up more layers of the way people will behave and interpret and whatever. But I think bring it on. I think I'm going to navigate all that information better than you are. And that's the bet that I'm making. So I've really tried to embrace everything about those dynamics, especially people underestimating you. I promise that when you best them in whatever way, you eliminate them from the tournament, you get the better deal than they do, whatever it is, then they're going to change their mind. Or if they don't, like they're going to keep losing to you. So I try to not let myself be too worried about it. And I'm going to beat you by playing better than you. I don't have to do anything else than that.
So basically just keep in mind what you want, the eye on the prize, as they say, and let everything else feed into how to make that happen.
I think take what you are perceiving as potentially negative, whether it's energy or attitude, or you think somebody isn't giving you the respect you want, and figure out how you can use it to your advantage. That's what I think.
Got it. So I am now sold. I want to learn poker.
When are we giving you your first poker lesson?
I actually did take my first poker lesson, and I had a very surprising revelation. I thought I was risk taking because I'm pretty heavy in equities and stuff like that. I was like, yeah, I'm a risk taker. And absolutely not the case. I was terrified. And this was just an amazing experience. So I'd love for you to talk all about it.
Totally. That would be amazing.
So how does one learn poker, especially if you're a woman?
Yeah. So Poker Power is one of the initiatives that I consult for. They are trying to teach 1 million women poker, and there are classes that meet every week, and the first section of them are free, and they teach total beginners. It's a really fun environment with other women, usually in some kind of business from all walks. And that's probably like the best way for a beginner to learn. And then once you learn the strategy, you get a little bit of hands-on play for no money. You don't have to risk anything. Then you can try your skills for real, like at a tournament or an event or a casino or whatever. Then you can start to like really do something with it. Usually what people find is that it's very intimidating at first to like do just everything else to do this. And afterward, they're like, ooh, I'm so glad I did that. And we hear these stories all the time throughout the company. Like, you know, I've been playing poker for the last few months. And because of that, I negotiated a deal for the sale of my car 30% more than what I would have done before because of XYZ. Or, you know, I was able to make a better decision in this deal because I could tell that someone was lying to me, because I was able to pick up from that from reading people in poker. So there's so many ways it immediately pays dividends outside. But the game itself is just super fun. It's just so fun. So we can either get you involved in the Poker Power classes, or you can come out to the World Series of Poker and I'll just put you in an event then, give you a crash course, and we'll see how you do.
If I survive. But I have to tell you that the experience was exactly what you described. I was terrified, even though I knew there was no money. These were all women. And just within 4 weeks, I could see a very clear willingness to look more stupid, take more risks.
Yeah.
It was transformative. So I'll put in my 2 cents to pitch Poker Power. You guys do an amazing job. So as a professional poker player for women who are trying to get into business and doing all these risky things, what are the top 3 tips you'd want them to take away and implement tomorrow in their life?
So without playing poker, you mean? Just from this?
Translating. Yeah. Well, they learn poker and then do what?
Oh, after they learn poker.
Would it change if it was before or after poker?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, so give us both.
Okay. From this conversation alone, I think it's really important to recognize when you're getting that mental thought process hijacked by your emotions. And instead of try to ignore it or deal with it in the moment, accept that whatever you're afraid of is a realistic outcome and actually make peace with that. What is it? What's the worst case scenario? Bring it into the tangible rather than this looming specter. And then you can make peace with it. Okay, it's not the worst thing in the world. I'm going to survive. Set it aside and make your decision. And that goes for anything. That would be number one. Number two would be the tilt tip. I would try to have the stronger you protect the weaker you in any situation where you feel like the weaker you is sabotaging the stronger you. And the way to do that is, like I said, the creation of parameters that the weaker you won't be able to thwart. And the third thing I think would be to try to give yourself an avenue to start learning to tolerate risk, whether that is playing a game that involves a risk like poker or having a monthly activity where you do something that scares you, and just teach yourself to create those pathways mentally. After you play poker, I think it becomes very clear the line that I was saying about using other people's views of you to your advantage. You get to really sense that at the table, and you get to like have repeated opportunity to do that. So I think that's one of the biggest takeaways from the poker table. Another one from actually playing poker that you learn is that if you want to win, you have to bet big. And that goes for both ways. So if I am trying to bluff you, but I'm afraid to make a big bet, I only make a tiny bet, well, that's not really going to do the job, is it? That's not going to scare you away. And conversely, if I have an amazing hand and I'm worried that you're going to fold and I just make this small bet, then I'm not making everything that I could out of it. So I think that learning to go bigger to where it probably feels uncomfortable is a great lesson that actual poker teaches you. And I also think that through the game, you start to learn that just because something didn't have the great result that you wanted it to have doesn't mean you don't do it again. Maybe in poker, I tried to bluff you and I had a good reason to do so, and I thought you would fold, but you just happened to have a hand that was good enough to call me. That doesn't mean like, oh, I should never do that again. You learn, I'm going to make that play again if I think it's the right play, and eventually you're going to start to see those results. So you really get that experience very quickly in the game that decisions have to be separated from results. And how do we improve our decision making? And how do we make sure we're not tricking ourselves with our emotional view of the results?
I love it.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Melanie. This has been an amazing conversation, and I took away a lot, and I'm sure our listeners will take away a lot too. And very, very good luck and skill to you in all of your poker.
My absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to today's episode. Find show notes and more at achieve.co. That's achiiv.co/podcast. Like what you heard? Hit subscribe on Spotify, Apple, or Google Podcast and never miss another episode. Want to help others like you? Leave us a review and tell a friend. See you on the next episode. Now, go achieve.